June 18, 1883, west edge of the Wyoming Territory. Just outside the town of Hazel Creek, the sun had dipped low behind the red cliffs when Nolan Zeller reined in his horse at the edge of the old ravine. He had been tracking lost cattle since morning, dust on his boots and a dry ache in his throat, but something down below caught his eye movement, faint and unsteady, like a bird with a broken wing. He squinted, jaw tightening. It was not a bird. There, wedged between a fallen pine and a jut of rock, was a woman. Her dress was torn at the hem and dirt streaked her face, but she was alive and clearly stuck. Nolan swung down from his saddle without a second thought. "Miss," he called, voice firm but calm, "do not move." "I am coming down." She looked up, eyes wide and full of pain. "Be careful," she said, voice hoarse. "The ledge is loose." "I see it." He tested the slope with his boots, then climbed down careful as a cat, gripping roots and rock until he reached her. Up close, he saw the blood at her temple and the way her ankle bent wrong beneath her skirt. Her hair was dark and tangled, her skin sun warmed and scraped, but her gaze met his without fear. "You are a cowboy?" she asked. "Name's Nolan Zeller. I work the bar L up north." He crouched beside her. "What is your name?" "Juliette Kerns," she said, teeth clenched against the pain. "I was heading to Hazel Creek. My wagon lost the trail. I tried to find help, then the ground gave out." He nodded, already scanning her injuries. "Your ankle's busted." "You cannot climb out like this." "I know," she whispered. He took off his coat and laid it over her shoulders. "I will lift you out." "It is steep," she said, glancing up the rock face. "You could fall." "I will not fall," he said simply. He moved with steady hands, bracing her carefully against his chest, mindful of her leg. She gritted her teeth but did not cry out. The climb was slow and tight, but Nolan never let his grip falter. When they reached the top, he set her down gently in the shade of a juniper and let out a breath he did not know he was holding. Juliette blinked up at him. "You carried me all that way." "You were not staying down there," he said. She smiled faintly, her lips cracked. "You do this for all strangers." "No," he said, "just you." He gave her water from his canteen, then tore strips from his undershirt to wrap her ankle. She watched him with a quiet intensity, her brows drawn. "I had a horse," she said. "She ran off when I fell." "Then I will find her," Nolan said. "But first, we get you to town." He helped her onto his horse, climbed up behind her, and wrapped his arm around her to steady her weight. She leaned back against his chest, her head resting just beneath his chin. "I do not even know you," she said softly. "You will," he said. They rode slow, the sun painting long shadows behind them. Juliette was quiet, but her hand gripped his forearm like she meant to never let go. By the time they reached Hazel Creek, the stars were out. Nolan took her straight to the doctor's house. Doc Maynard patched her leg and stitched the gash on her temple, shaking his head at how lucky she was to be found. "She will need rest," the doctor said. "Weeks of it, maybe more." "Where is her family?" Juliette looked away. Nolan answered for her. "She is staying at my place." Doc Maynard raised a brow but said nothing. Outside, Nolan helped her back onto the horse, gentler this time. She looked at him under the gaslight glow. "You do not have to take me in." "I know," he said. "But I want to." She was quiet for a while as they rode, the night cool and sweet around them. "I lost everything," she said finally. "My wagon, my horse, my letters. I was supposed to start over here." "You still can," Nolan said. "With help." She turned her face toward his chest, her voice barely a whisper. "I do not want to be alone anymore." He held her tighter, a promise in the way his hand covered hers. They reached his small ranch as moonlight bathed the valley. Nolan helped her inside, set her up in his spare room, and left a lamp burning low on the kitchen table. Before he left her to rest, she caught his wrist. "Nolan," he turned. "Thank you," she said. "For finding me," he nodded. "I am glad I did." She let go slowly. But as he walked away, her eyes stayed on him, steady and soft. And for the first time in a long while, Nolan felt like something had changed, like maybe his quiet life out in the hills was about to get a whole lot less lonely. Morning settled slow over the land, light filtering in through the warped glass of the kitchen window. Juliette sat at the edge of the chair Nolan had pulled up for her, her ankle bandaged and set atop a wooden crate padded with a folded wool coat. The room smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. Nolan had been up early. She heard him moving around outside before the sky even pinked. She kept her hands folded in her lap, fingers tracing the edge of a broken thread on her sleeve. The silence didn't press on her the way it once might have. Here, it felt like something honest. The door opened with a low creak. Nolan stepped in, brushing dust off his sleeves. "Fence is holding," he said. "Might be a loose board near the southern end, but nothing urgent." Juliette tilted her head, watching him hang his hat near the door. "You always talk to your guests about fences," he paused, then offered a quiet shrug. "Only the ones who look like they might care." "I do," she said. "My father kept 2 milk cows." If the fence gave, they'd be in the neighbor's orchard before you could blink. He smiled at that, a small curve of his mouth that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sounds like they had opinions. They liked apples more than sense. "We called the bigger one Mercy, though she had none." He pulled a second mug off the shelf and poured coffee. "You from Missouri?" "Close," she said. "Arkansas near the White River. I left after the frost killed the orchard. Nothing left to tend but ghosts." He didn't ask more. She sipped the coffee, grateful for the warmth, and watched the way he busied himself moving quiet through the kitchen, checking the stove, setting a few apples in a bowl on the table. He didn't speak unless he meant it, and she found she liked that. "I'll find your horse today," he said. "Tracks'll be clearer now." "I hope she's not hurt," Juliette said. "She was skittish when I bought her, but smart." "I'll bring her back if I can," he said, "and if not, we'll find another." She looked down at her bandaged foot. "I won't be much good in the meantime. You don't owe me anything." "I didn't say I did." He met her gaze then, steady and thoughtful. "If you're looking for work when you're healed, there's enough to go around here. Chores pile up faster than I can clear them." Her brow lifted. "You sure you want someone limping around your place?" "I want someone who knows cows prefer apples," he said. She laughed, soft and surprised, and the sound seemed to settle something between them. That afternoon, he returned with a streak of sweat down his back and a lathered horse beside him, her mare, dusty but unhurt. Juliette reached out as the animal nudged her shoulder. "You found her." "She was drinking from the creek South Bend," he said. "Didn't spook when I approached." "I think she remembered your scent." Juliette stroked the mare's muzzle, her fingers gentle. "She's all I had left, thank you." Nolan didn't reply right away. He glanced toward the hills, then back at her. "You have more now." She didn't speak, but her fingers stilled against the mare's neck. Evenings came cooler now. That night, she sat near the small fire he lit outside, her foot propped and a shawl around her shoulders. Nolan handed her a plate beans, cornbread, and a hard-boiled egg and sat beside her without ceremony. "Do you miss Arkansas?" he asked. "I miss the sound of my mother singing," she said after a moment. "But not the rest. It stopped feeling like home before the trees turned bare," he nodded. "Home's a hard thing to carry with you," she glanced at him. "Did you ever have one? Not for long." "My folks didn't stay anywhere more than 2 seasons. By the time I was 12, I knew how to pack a wagon faster than I could read a book." She turned back to the fire. "Maybe staying's the harder thing." He looked at her then, and the pause between them stretched, not uncomfortable but full. "You think you can stay here?" he asked low. "I think I might want to," she answered. He didn't move, but the corner of his mouth lifted the faintest bit. "Then we'll see what that looks like." The wind shifted, bringing the scent of sagebrush. She leaned back slightly, careful of her foot, and closed her eyes. In the hush between them, something took root, quiet, certain, and unexpected. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need to. The rain came 2 days later, thin and steady, tapping against the roof like a memory. Juliette sat by the hearth, her foot resting on a pinewood stool Nolan had sanded smooth years ago. She was sewing a patch into the sleeve of one of his shirts, the needle moving with the kind of focus that quieted her thoughts. The fire crackled low, its warmth chasing off the damp. Nolan came in from the barn with his coat pulled tight across his shoulders, water dripping from the brim of his hat. He didn't speak right away, just set his gloves on the stove's edge and hung his coat by the door. His eyes lingered on her hands working the thread. "You sew like you've done it for years," he said. "I have," she replied, not looking up. "My brothers tore everything they wore. I learned early that fixing was cheaper than replacing." He nodded and stepped toward the table, pouring himself a cup of chicory. "Did your family stay close?" he asked. She finished her stitch before answering. Not after the war, folks scattered, some north, some just disappeared. I haven't heard from any of them in 5 years. He leaned against the edge of the counter. That long, she set the shirt aside and looked at him. Sometimes there's nothing to go back to. Nolan took a sip, then set the cup down. I got a letter once, from a cousin in Kansas, said he'd married into money and forgot the rest of us. Didn't even sign his name. Juliette gave a soft sound, not quite a laugh. People change when there's comfort involved, or they show you who they always were. She folded the shirt and set it in the basket beside her. The rain softened, the light outside turning a shade paler. He crossed the room and crouched to stir the fire. I've got some seed potatoes in the root cellar, he said. Meant to plant them weeks back, but the ground was too dry. This rain might help. She tilted her head. You planting a whole crop? Just enough for the two of us, maybe some onions too. If you're staying, Juliette's eyes held on his face. I haven't seen anyone work a garden in years. You haven't seen me work one, he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted briefly. She didn't respond, but something gentled in her expression. That night, the rain let up. Nolan brought in a crate of kindling and set it by the stove. As he straightened, he caught her watching him. You always this steady? She asked. He gave a quiet breath through his nose. Only when it's needed. She stood carefully, testing the pressure on her foot. You think I'll get in your way once I'm back on both legs? No, he said. I think you'll get in your own way before I let you in mine. She stepped closer, her brow drawn. You don't talk like a man who's been alone this long. I've been quiet, not hollow. Juliette reached out and touched his wrist. Her fingers were warm against his skin, the touch light but sure. I don't expect anything, she said, but I don't want to leave this behind. He didn't move away. You won't. The air between them shifted, nothing rushed, nothing sudden. Just a quiet understanding, like two rivers finally meeting after running the same valley. She let her hand fall, but the space between them stayed close. Outside, the fields soaked in the water they'd needed for weeks. And inside, neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. The wind shifted eastward by midweek, carrying with it the rough scent of sage and something else, storm maybe, or just change. Nolan stood at the edge of the pasture, arms folded, watching Juliette coax the mare into a slow circle. Her limp had lessened. She still favored the bad foot, but there was weight behind her steps now, balance returning day by day. You're holding the reins too tight, he called out. Juliette blew a loose strand of hair away from her face. She kept trying to turn back. I'm keeping her honest. She's not dishonest, just stubborn. He walked toward the fence, resting his forearms against the top rail. You give her room to think, she'll pick the right path herself. Juliette gave a small huff and let the reins slacken. The mare slowed, ears twitching, and settled into a better rhythm. You ever train horses? She asked. Some, mostly just listen to them. Seems to work. He didn't answer that, just watched her ride another slow pass around the paddock. The sun caught in her hair, and there was something in the way she sat the saddle loose, steady, like she was remembering how to belong to something. That evening, she joined him near the chicken coop, where he was mending a latch. She knelt beside the post and handed him nails without needing to be asked. My mother taught me to mend things, she said. Clothes mostly, but she said the trick is in looking close, seeing where the tear really started. He tapped the last nail in. That true for people too? Juliette wiped her hands on her apron. I think so. Most folks patch over what's visible, but the fray starts deeper. He picked up the fallen hinge and turned it in his hand. You ever figure out where yours started? She didn't answer right away. I stayed too long where I wasn't wanted. That kind of thing wears you thin. Nolan stood and looked down at her. You're not thin anymore. She met his gaze, steady and calm. You're not either. They finished the chore in silence, but it wasn't empty. When she stood, she didn't limp as hard, and she didn't lean on anything for balance. Later, back inside, she stirred a pot of beans over the stove while Nolan whittled by the window. The light outside had gone gold and long. He paused, watching the curve of her back as she moved. You ever think about staying longer than a season? He asked. She didn't turn. I've been thinking of little else. He set down the carving. You could have your own corner of this land. We could fence off the north field, plant something more than potatoes. She turned then, spoon in hand. You offering me a patch of earth. I'm offering you a place where what you build stays yours. She stepped closer, her voice low. And you, I've been here a long time, Juliette. But this place only started feeling like something I wanted to share since you showed up. She reached out, fingers wrapping around his. Then let's build a fence. He nodded once, slow and sure. They went outside after supper, the moon rising above the hills. He handed her a hammer, and she took it without hesitation. Together they walked the north edge of the property, measuring with steps and marking posts in the dirt. Their shadows stretched ahead of them, side by side. When they stopped to rest, she leaned her shoulder into his. You always work by moonlight, only when it feels like something worth remembering. Juliette tilted her face toward him, her expression unreadable in the dim. You think we'll remember this? I know I will. She smiled, then not faint, not guarded, but full. He reached for her hand again, and this time she laced her fingers through his. No words followed. None were needed. The night held them quiet, and the land around them listened. By late July, the air had turned thick with heat, the kind that settled in the hollows of trees and clung to skin through the night. Nolan had taken to rising before the sun, working the eastern fence line while the valley still held its breath. Juliette, steadier on her feet now, had begun tending the garden patch near the creek, a modest stretch of turned earth with rows of sprouting green, marked with small stones she'd painted in the evenings. That morning she stood barefoot in the cool soil, sleeves rolled to her elbows, gathering early squash in her apron. Nolan approached from the pasture, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. There's a neighbor up near the ridge, he said. Silas Hayward. He's moving north, selling off what's left of his stock. Couple of dairy cows, some tack, a cider press. Juliette tipped her head. You thinking of buying? If we're planting more than potatoes, we'll need more than one pair of hands come harvest. She brushed dirt from a squash. You thinking ahead? I'm thinking steady. She held his gaze. You trust me to stay? I trust what you've already done. He looked at the garden, then down at her bare feet in the soil. You've made the place look different. I didn't change the land, no, he said quietly. But you made it feel like it's ours. That evening, they sat beneath the cottonwood by the barn. The tree's wide limbs gave shade, and the breeze carried the scent of wild mint from the creek. Juliette held a folded letter in her hands, the paper soft from travel. It's from someone who knew my brother, she said. A woman up near Helena said he died 2 years back, smallpox. Nolan didn't speak. He and I hadn't spoken since before I left Arkansas, but he was still my blood. You want to go north? He asked, voice low. She shook her head. No. I just needed to know where the story ended. He leaned back against the tree trunk. Sometimes knowing is enough. She turned the letter over once, then folded it again and tucked it into the pocket of her dress. I've been thinking, she said, about what it would mean to stay here as more than just a guest. He didn't move, but she felt the stillness in him sharpen. I want to be your partner, she continued, not just your help. Not just someone passing through. He looked at her then, not startled, not uncertain, just quiet, like something long held had finally settled. I've built this life to hold one person, he said. If I build again, it'll be for two. Juliette reached for his hand. Then let's build it together. They married 2 weeks later beneath the cottonwood, the same tree where she'd spoken her truth. Doc Maynard stood witness, along with his wife, Ruth, who tied a blue ribbon around Juliette's wrist as blessing. The ceremony was short. Nolan wore a clean shirt and carried a ring he'd carved from the wood of a fallen walnut tree. Juliette wore a dress Ruth had helped her fit, simple and pale. Afterward, they shared bread and sweet cider by the garden. Nolan placed his hand at the small of Juliette's back, steady and present, and she leaned into him, her smile soft and certain. Seasons turned. They brought in the harvest, storing squash and potatoes in the cellar Nolan had reinforced with stone. A cider barrel stood in the corner of the shed, half full from the Hayward press. The dairy cow calved in early spring, and Juliette named the calf myrtle after her mother's favorite flower. They built a new room on the back of the cabin, with windows facing the creek. Nolan taught Juliette to read maps by lantern light, and she taught him to stitch a clean hem. At night, she curled into the crook of his arm, and he pressed his lips to her temple before sleep took them. The land did not soften, it still asked for sweat, still bore wind and drought and days of silence, but together they met it. Not with loud declarations, but with shared tools, steady hands, and trust born of choosing each other again and again. Years passed. The garden grew, so did the fence line. And each morning, when Juliette stepped out into the early light, she found Nolan already at work, waiting with 2 mugs of chicory and a look that said, without needing words, that he'd never stopped being glad she'd fallen down that ravine. They lived that way quietly, fully, and without regret. And when folks in Hazel Creek spoke of them, they didn't tell the story of a cowboy saving a stranger. They told the story of a man and a woman who built a life from the ground up, side by side, with nothing but the land beneath them and the steady, unshakable love between them.